30 kilometers southwest of Salt Lake City, in the folded brown ridges of the Ochre Mountains, there is a hole in the earth so large that astronauts have picked it out with the naked eye. It is not a crater from an asteroid, not a collapsed volcanic caldera, not some ancient scar left by glaciers or rivers. Every ounce of rock missing from that mountain was removed on purpose, one blast and one truckload at a time, by generations of miners chasing a low-grade streak of copper or that happened to run impossibly deep. The result is Bingham Canyon Mine, also known as the Kennecott Copper Mine, a pit more than a kilometer deep and 4 kilometers across, carved continuously since 1906. It is, by most measures, the largest excavation human beings have ever made. People reach for the Grand Canyon almost instinctively when they try to describe it, and the comparison is fair in spirit even if it breaks down on the numbers. The Grand Canyon is roughly 1,800 meters deep in places and up to 29 kilometers across. A river's patient work over 6 million years, an act of erosion on a geologic timescale. Bingham Canyon is smaller in raw dimensions, but the comparison isn't really about size. It's about the fact that a single copper company, working for a little over a century, managed to gouge a hole into a mountain that is proportionally comparable to nature's grandest canyon, and did it in roughly 100,000th of the time. Where the Colorado River needed millions of years and the patient chemistry of water and stone, Bingham Canyon needed dynamite, steam shovels, and an appetite for copper that never let up. 2 brothers and a mountain full of cattle. The story begins, as so many Western mining stories do, with livestock. In the early 1850s, 2 Mormon pioneer brothers, Thomas and Sanford Bingham, were grazing cattle in the canyon that would eventually take their name. They noticed mineral outcroppings in the rock, the kind of thing a prospector's eye catches and a rancher's eye usually passes over. Devout members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the brothers reported what they'd found to their spiritual leader, Brigham Young. Young's response has become one of the more quietly consequential decisions in Utah history. He told them to leave it alone and get back to farming. Young's caution wasn't superstition. He was worried, correctly as it turned out, that a mining rush would flood the Salt Lake Valley with non-Mormon settlers, destabilizing the tightly controlled agricultural society the church was trying to build in the desert. For a decade or two, that policy held the mountains secret in check. But geology doesn't respect institutional patience forever, and by the late 1860s the economic gravity of mining had become too strong to resist. The church itself eventually stepped back from discouraging it, recognizing that Utah's future was going to include, or whether leadership liked it or not. The canyon's first working mines chased gold, silver, and lead, the traditional precious metal trinity that drove 19th century prospecting across the American West. Shafts were sunk into the mountainside in the classic style, narrow tunnels following veins of or underground, miners working by lamplight, mules hauling or carts through the dark. It was profitable enough, but unremarkable as far as Western mining towns went. The silver and lead played out, as these things tend to, by the early 20th century. What made Bingham Canyon different from 100 other exhausted mining camps was what was underneath the metals everyone had already taken. An enormous, low-grade deposit of copper ore, spread through the rock not in a rich, narrow vein, but in a vast, diffuse cloud. Geologists call this kind of deposit a porphyry copper deposit, and it's formed by a genuinely dramatic process. Molten magma pushing up through older rock layers, cooling and crystallizing as it goes, while superheated fluids circulate through cracks in the stone and slowly deposit copper-bearing minerals across a huge volume of rock. It's not a jackpot vein you can follow with a pickaxe. It's copper spread thin across an entire mountain. The idea that changed everything. In 1904, an engineer named Daniel Jackling looked at Bingham Canyon's low-grade copper deposit and had an idea that most of the mining establishment at the time considered close to insane. Traditional underground mining made sense when you were chasing a rich, concentrated vein. You dig a narrow shaft, follow the ore, and leave the surrounding rock alone because it isn't worth the effort. But Bingham's copper wasn't concentrated. It was everywhere and nowhere, 1% or 2% of copper scattered through an entire mountainside of otherwise ordinary rock. Jackling's insight was that if the ore was too diffuse to tunnel toward, the solution was to stop tunneling and start removing the entire mountain instead. Rather than digging narrow shafts to follow rich veins, his approach called for stripping away the mountain in broad, terraced layers, crushing enormous volumes of rock, and using industrial-scale processing to extract the comparatively tiny fraction of copper contained within. It was a volume game rather than a precision game. Profitable only if you could move rock cheaply and process it efficiently at a scale nobody had really attempted before. In 1906, that idea became a functioning mine. The Utah Copper Company began the first open-pit operations at Bingham Canyon, and within a few years the technique proved itself decisively. By 1911, the Utah Copper Company had purchased the property outright and was extracting copper on an industrial scale. By 1920, production had already surpassed 1 million tons of ore removed per year, and the pit kept growing, terrace by terrace, decade by decade, because there was no natural stopping point. As long as copper prices justified the cost of extraction, there was always more diffuse or lower down, and the only way to reach it was to make the hole wider and deeper at the same time. ##an inverted mountain. What Jackling's open-pit method produced, over more than a century of continuous operation, is one of the strangest landscapes on the North American continent. A mountain turned inside out. Instead of a peak rising into the sky, Bingham Canyon is a spiral staircase descending into the earth, terrace after terrace of roads wide enough for the enormous haul trucks that carry ore and waste rock up out of the pit around the clock. The scale is difficult to communicate in numbers alone, but the numbers are worth sitting with anyway. The pit is more than 3/4 of a mile deep, over 1,200 meters, deep enough to swallow more than 2 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. It stretches roughly 2.5 miles across, about 4 kilometers, wide enough that the trucks working the far rim look like toys from the visitor overlook on the near side. All told, the excavation covers close to 1,900 acres, an area larger than many American downtowns. It is visible from orbit, not as some romantic exaggeration, but as a literal, documented fact confirmed by NASA satellite imagery and by astronauts who have picked it out among the handful of human structures identifiable from space with the naked eye. To make that hole, engineers estimate that more rock has been removed from Bingham Canyon than was excavated for the Panama Canal, and more than was moved to build Hoover Dam, combined, and by a wide margin. It is not a close comparison. The volume of material extracted from this single mountainside, over a century of continuous digging, exceeds what it took to reroute an ocean and dam a river. And it has been worth it. Bingham Canyon has produced more copper than any single mine in recorded history, while over 19 million tons of refined copper pulled from the ground since operations began, along with substantial quantities of gold, silver, and molybdenum recovered as byproducts of the same ore. Economists have estimated that the total value of metals extracted from Bingham Canyon exceeds the combined output of the California Gold Rush, the Comstock Lode Silver Strike in Nevada, and the Klondike Gold Rush, 3 of the most legendary mineral booms in American history, outproduced by a single unglamorous copper pit that most Americans have never heard of. The machines that made it possible. None of this would be physically possible without equipment built at a scale to match the ambition. The trucks that haul ore and waste rock up the terraced roads of Bingham Canyon are among the largest wheeled vehicles ever manufactured. Machines standing taller than a 2-story house, with tires alone taller than an adult, capable of carrying loads of several hundred tons in a single trip. Massive electric and hydraulic shovels claw at the working faces of the pit, filling truck beds in a handful of scoops. Conveyor systems and crushing stations process the raw ore into manageable material, feeding it toward the concentrator plant, the smelter, and the refinery that together turn mountain rock into marketable copper. The terrace structure of the pit walls, the layered, spiraling appearance that makes Bingham Canyon so visually distinctive from above, isn't just an aesthetic byproduct of the mining method. It's an engineering necessity. Each terrace, or bench, serves double duty. It provides a road wide enough for the haul trucks to move ore and waste rock out of the pit, and it stabilizes the walls of an excavation that would otherwise be prone to catastrophic collapse. Mining a hole this large and this deep means constantly fighting gravity, and the terraces are the primary tool for doing it. That fight isn't always won. #the landslide. On the night of April 10th, 2013, at around 9:30 p.m., the northeastern wall of Bingham Canyon Mine let go. An estimated 65 to 70 million cubic meters of rock and soil, some estimates run even higher, slid down into the pit in what may be the largest non-volcanic landslide in North American history. Satellite images taken before and after show a landscape reshaped almost overnight. A section of the pit's rim simply gone, swallowed and redeposited hundreds of meters below where it had stood. By any reasonable measure, it should have been a catastrophe. A landslide of that magnitude, striking an active industrial site with hundreds of workers and enormous mining equipment scattered across the terraces, had every ingredient for mass casualties. Instead, not a single person was hurt. The reason comes down to monitoring technology that had been specifically installed because engineers understood the risk inherent in a pit wall of this scale. Slope stability radar systems continuously tracked the movement of the rock face in the days before the slide, watching for the kind of gradual deformation that precedes a major collapse. When the readings crossed a critical threshold, mine operators made the call to halt operations and pull workers and equipment out of the area, a full day before the wall actually failed. The landslide that followed, when it finally came, poured into an empty pit. The financial cost was still significant. The slide was projected to cut copper production by roughly 100,000 tons, and the debris took months of additional excavation to clear before normal operations could resume. A smaller secondary slide followed that September, triggering the evacuation of about 100 workers, though again without injury. Together, the two events stand as a stark demonstration of both the mine's sheer physical instability at that scale and the effectiveness of the systems built to manage it. Engineers studying the 2013 slide have since used it as a case study in landslide science more broadly, a rare instance of a massive slope failure that was not only predicted but predicted precisely enough to save lives. #a landmark and a wound. In 1966, the National Park Service designated the Bingham Canyon open pit copper mine a National Historic Landmark, formally recognizing its significance not as a natural wonder, but as an industrial one, a monument to a particular vision of American resource extraction and the engineering ingenuity that made it possible. It sits in an odd category of landmark. Unlike a battlefield or a historic building, the thing being preserved is, in a sense, an ongoing act of destruction. The designation honors a whole that is still being made larger. That tension runs through the mine's entire modern history. Bingham Canyon has been an economic engine for Utah for more than a century, employing thousands of workers directly and supporting a much larger regional economy of suppliers, smelters, and transportation networks built around it. At various points, Kennecott Copper, and later its owner, the Rio Tinto Group, has supplied a substantial share of the copper consumed in the United States, a metal essential to everything from electrical wiring to plumbing to the renewable energy infrastructure of the 21st century. But that production has come with an environmental footprint to match the mine's physical scale. Decades of mining and smelting operations around Bingham Canyon contaminated groundwater and soil across a wide area of the Salt Lake Valley with heavy metals and mining byproducts, eventually leading to portions of the surrounding region being designated a federal Superfund cleanup site. The same open-pit method that made the mine's copper cheap enough to be profitable also meant processing staggering volumes of waste rock and tailings, material that had to go somewhere, and that somewhere has left a lasting mark on the land and water around the mine, one that cleanup efforts continue to address today. ## what the walls remember. Stand at the visitor overlook on the north side of the pit, the one spot where the public can still look directly into the excavation, and the scale is almost impossible to process at first. The terraces spiral downward in neat, ruler-straight bands, road after road cut into rock in a pattern too regular to look natural and too vast to look entirely artificial either. There are trucks working the pit floor, machines the size of houses, appear from that height as small as toy models rolling along a diorama. Every one of those terraces is a layer of history, in a sense, a record of a particular year, a particular grade, a particular set of machines that cut it. The tool marks are still there in the rock, layer after layer, the way growth rings sit inside a tree trunk. Except a tree grows outward over centuries by natural process, and this mountain was cut downward over generations by decision after human decision. Daniel Jackling's insight that a diffuse deposit was worth mining at volume. A company's willingness to buy the land and build the machines. Workers, generation after generation, running shovels and trucks and crushers around the clock. Engineers watching radar screens for the tremor that would warn them a wall was about to fail. The Grand Canyon took the patient, indifferent work of a river working across 6 million years. Bingham Canyon took a little over a century, done on purpose, by people chasing something they wanted badly enough to remove a mountain to get it. Both are enormous. Both are visible from space. But only one of them was built with tool marks anybody meant to leave. The mine is still active today, still descending, still adding terraces to a wall that has already produced more copper than any other single site in human history. There is no natural endpoint to an operation like this, no vein that runs out, no seam that pinches off. As long as there is copper worth extracting and a market willing to pay for it, Bingham Canyon will keep getting a little deeper, a little wider, one more layer down into a mountain that has been disappearing, on purpose, for more than 100 years.